The Duke laughed at the peasant girl, until her secret letter revealed the truth about the throne. The great hall glittered with golden chandeliers, every noble draped in silk and jewels. Laughter echoed against the marble, sharp and cruel, as the Duke pointed at the peasant girl forced to serve wine. "She dares to stand among us?" he sneered, and the crowd erupted in mocking whispers. No one knew her name, nor cared to ask. She was nothing more than a shadow in their eyes, until one letter, hidden in her pocket, carried a truth that could shatter crowns. Tonight, humiliation was only the beginning. The court thought she was powerless, but destiny was about to twist in ways none could imagine. Outside, the winter wind howled, rattling the high windows of Ravenshire Castle. Inside, warmth and decadence reigned. The ball was not just celebration. It was politics, wrapped in velvet and gold. Dukes, barons, and counts whispered of alliances, of secrets traded as easily as wine. Every smile concealed ambition. And there she stood, Elise, daughter of a farmer long forgotten by history, summoned to serve in the presence of those who ruled her world. Her dress was plain, her hands rough with labor, and yet her eyes carried something the nobles could not name, something that unsettled even the Duke who mocked her. For Elise had not come empty-handed. Pressed against her chest, beneath the fabric of her dress, rested a folded piece of parchment, sealed with wax. A letter written not for her, but entrusted to her by trembling hands on a stormy night. Its words held power enough to unravel lies that had been woven for generations. But no one in the hall knew. To them, she was a spectacle, a peasant in the lion's den, a servant too foolish to know her place. And so they laughed, unaware that every cruel word, every insult flung her way, only brought her closer to the moment she would decide, remain silent and live as nothing, or reveal the secret and ignite a fire that could consume the kingdom. The orchestra swelled, drowning the whispers. Elise lowered her gaze, not in shame, but in calculation. The night was long, and fate had given her a stage. What began as mockery would end in revelation. The only question was, who would still be standing when the truth came to light? The laughter from the Duke still echoed in Elise's ears as she left the great hall for the servants' quarters, balancing trays heavier than her body could bear. Every noble glance burned like fire against her skin. To them, she was less than human. Just a peasant girl, useful only to fill goblets and sweep marble floors polished enough to mirror the vanity of their owners. But Elise had always known struggle. From the age of 6, she rose before the sun, her hands blistered by the plow, her lungs filled with the dust of endless fields. Hunger was her first companion, silence her second. When her mother fell sick and her father was conscripted into the Lord's army, Elise had carried her younger brothers on her back, becoming the spine of a family no one else cared to hold upright. Hardship carved strength into her bones. It was the one thing the nobility could never understand. Suffering had not broken her, it had forged her. And yet, within the castle walls, her strength was invisible. The nobles' cruelty was deliberate, sharpened like daggers. One baron's daughter tossed her empty goblet at Elise's feet, whispering loudly enough for all to hear, "Even her shadow dirties the floor." Another sneered, "Perhaps the Duke will keep her as entertainment for the hounds." Their words dripped venom, designed to crush the spirit of anyone too bold to stand tall in their presence. Elise's fingers tightened around the tray. She wanted to answer, to strike back with the truth folded against her chest. But she hesitated. The letter's secret was dangerous, deadly even. To reveal it too soon would mean her end. She needed to wait, to endure. And so she bowed her head, though her heart screamed rebellion. Later, when the candles dimmed and the nobles retreated to private corners of whispers and schemes, Elise slipped away. She found the chapel, empty, silent, and cold. There, before the altar, she allowed her tears to fall, not of weakness, but of rage. She remembered the trembling man who had given her the letter. His words echoed, "Keep it safe, Elise. If the time comes, reveal it. This kingdom is built on lies." She traced the wax seal with her fingertips. The symbol pressed into it was unmistakable, the crest of the royal house. If opened, the words inside could destroy reputations, dethrone rulers, and shift the very balance of power. But until the right moment, she remained a ghost in silks and shadows, biding her time. The struggle was not only against the nobles, it was against herself. Every insult was a test of her patience, every humiliation a temptation to ignite the fire too soon. Elise was caught in the cruel theater of hierarchy, forced to play her part until destiny allowed her to speak. And though her spirit raged, she understood one truth. The higher the oppression, the greater the fall when the secret was revealed. And so, she endured. For now. The following evening, Ravenshire Castle hosted a banquet in honor of the Duke's return from campaign. The air reeked of roasted pheasant, rich wines, and the arrogance of men who believed the world bent for their titles alone. The Duke sat at the head of the long table, his smirk as sharp as the blade at his hip. When Elise entered carrying a jug of wine, the hall fell silent for a moment, long enough for the sneer to spread across his lips once more. "Well," he said, his voice carrying easily across the chamber, "even the rats of the fields find their way into noble halls these days." Laughter erupted, loud and cruel. The barons pounded the table in amusement. The ladies hid mocking smiles behind jeweled fans. Elise's cheeks burned, but she did not falter. She stepped forward with careful grace, pouring wine into goblets as though she had not heard him. But the Duke was not finished. "Tell me, girl," he pressed, his eyes glittering. "When you scrubbed floors in your mud hut, did you ever imagine serving wine to men who command armies? Or perhaps you dream of becoming one of us?" The words were barbed, each designed to slice her dignity apart. Elise's hands tightened around the jug. A hush fell. Everyone waited for her silence, her submission, the expected bow of the head. Instead, she lifted her gaze and met the Duke's eyes, steady, unflinching. "No, my lord," she said, her voice calm but edged like steel. "I dreamed of men who did not measure their worth by the fear they inspired, but by the justice they carried. Tell me, Duke, do you dream?" The hall gasped, as if the very walls had heard blasphemy. A servant speaking back? A peasant daring to turn words against a duke? Shock rippled through the court. The Duchess whispered furiously. The barons exchanged scandalized glances, and the Duke himself froze, his smirk fading into something darker. "You dare mock me?" he hissed, rising from his chair. His height and authority loomed like a storm, but Elise did not step back. Her pulse thundered, her palms trembled, yet she stood her ground. "I do not mock," she said softly, though the tremor in her voice carried more courage than defiance. "I only ask what dreams remain when laughter feeds on cruelty." For a long, unbearable moment, silence stretched across the hall. Then, the Duke laughed, a low, dangerous sound that chilled the marrow of everyone present. "Very well," he said at last, his voice echoing. "Perhaps you are more entertaining than I thought. Let us see how long your courage lasts, before it crumbles." The nobles erupted into whispers again, scandal and intrigue twining like smoke. Elise lowered her head, masking the spark in her eyes. The clash had left its mark. She had challenged the unchallengeable and survived. The Duke had tried to break her spirit in front of them all, but instead, he had revealed it. And though her knees shook beneath her plain dress, Elise understood one thing. The time to reveal the letter was drawing closer. The nobles had seen her strength. Now they would need to see the truth. The banquet ended, but whispers of Elise's defiance lingered like smoke in every corner of Ravenshire Castle. Servants spoke in hushed awe, nobles in scandalized tones, and yet, the Duke himself said nothing more of the incident. That silence was more dangerous than his ridicule. It was the silence of a man who no longer dismissed her, but watched. Elise noticed it first in the corridors. She would bow her head, carrying linens or trays, and when she dared glance up, she found his eyes already on her, studying, calculating. The same gaze that once dripped with mockery now carried something she could not name. Was it amusement, curiosity, or something far more dangerous? One night, as snow fell heavy against the stone walls, Elise slipped into the library, hoping for solitude. The fire burned low, books and maps scattered across the Duke's great desk. She reached for a candle when his voice cut through the silence. "You speak boldly for a girl who should know better." Her heart leapt. He was there, seated in the shadows, wine in hand. His coat hung loose around broad shoulders, the flickering fire carving sharp lines into his handsome face. Elise clenched the letter against her chest beneath her dress, the secret heavier than ever. "I only speak when silence becomes unbearable," she answered carefully. The Duke leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "Do you know what they say of me in the villages? That I crush rebellion before it breathes. That my enemies vanish without a trace. Yet you..." He paused, almost smiling. "You do not flinch." Elise's pulse thundered. She should have bowed, apologized, begged forgiveness. Instead, she held his gaze, as if daring him to strike. "Perhaps," she said softly, "it is because I have nothing left to fear." For a moment, silence hung between them, thick and dangerous. Then the Duke laughed, not cruelly this time, but with something closer to admiration. "You are either foolish or extraordinary," he murmured. "And I find myself uncertain which I prefer." The words unsettled her more than his mockery ever had. A Duke's attention was a weapon sharper than any blade. If the court suspected even a flicker of interest, the scandal would devour her. Yet beneath her fear, something stirred, something she despised herself for feeling. Because when he looked at her now, not as a servant, but as a woman, her chest ached with a longing she had buried all her life. And in that dangerous pull, Elise saw the shape of her own destruction. She turned away quickly, whispering, "Whatever you think of me, my lord, remember this. A shadow remains a shadow, no matter how brightly the fire burns." But the Duke's answer followed her like a curse. "Not when the shadow carries secrets brighter than flame." The night of the winter masquerade arrived, a celebration that gathered every noble family within 100 leagues. The ballroom shimmered under chandeliers of crystal, masks of gold and silver hiding faces that still carried ambition in their eyes. For Elise, it was another evening of silent service, yet her chest burned with the weight of the letter hidden against her skin. Whispers already stirred about her. Since her bold words to the Duke, she had become a curiosity, a subject of scandalous amusement. The peasant who dared to speak. Some mocked her openly, others studied her quietly, waiting for the Duke's next move. But fate moved faster than anyone expected. Near midnight, a commotion broke through the music. A baron, drunk with power and wine, cornered Elise by the marble pillars. His hand gripped her arm, his voice a venomous whisper. "You think yourself brave, girl? You shame us all with your insolence. Perhaps it's time someone taught you the price of pride." Elise froze, fear and rage battling within her. And then, before she could react, the Duke appeared. His mask glinted in the candlelight, his blade flashing as he tore the baron's grip away. "Touch her again," he said coldly, "and you will not leave this hall alive." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The music stopped. The Duke's public defense of a servant was scandal enough to ignite the court in flames. Elise's heart pounded, not from gratitude, but from the certainty that the secret she carried could no longer remain hidden. As the crowd's eyes bore into her, she realized the moment had come. Trembling, she drew the folded parchment from her dress. The red wax seal with the royal crest gleamed under the chandeliers. Murmurs swelled into cries of shock. "What is that?" demanded the Duchess, her fan trembling. Elise's voice shook but carried through the hall. "A letter written by the late Queen herself, entrusted to my family on the night she died. Its words reveal the truth of the throne, and the bloodline you all claim to honor." The hall erupted into chaos. Nobles surged forward, desperate to glimpse the seal. The Duke's eyes burned into hers, not with mockery now, but with something far more dangerous. Realization. The world had shifted. Elise was no longer a nameless servant. She was the keeper of a truth capable of toppling crowns. The parchment lay in Elise's hands like a blade drawn in a room full of silk. The Duke stepped forward, not to seize it, but to hold the hall at bay with nothing more than his gaze. "Let her speak," he commanded. Power obeyed. Elise broke the seal. Wax cracked. 1,000 years of pretense seemed to crack with it. She unfolded the letter and read, her voice steady though her knees trembled. "To whom truth may yet matter. If I do not live to see dawn, know this. The child the court calls heir was not born of my blood, but placed in my arms under threat and oath. The rightful line is hidden where pride refuses to look, among those whom the crown has forgotten." The room inhaled and did not exhale. The Duchess's fan snapped shut. A dozen lords reached for daggers they could not legally draw. The High Steward sputtered, "Forgery! This is treason!" Elise lifted the parchment so the sigil showed. The Queen's personal seal, impressed over a sliver of thread only the royal scribes used. The original scribe marked the margin with a prayer in his mother tongue, she said, turning the edge so the faint script caught the light. "Find me another hand in this court who knows that prayer." Silence. Then the old royal chaplain, who had not risen in years, stood. His eyes were wet. "Only the Queen and her scribe knew it," he whispered, "and 3 of us in this world remember its shape. She speaks truth." Panic searched for a host and found one in Lord Halvern. "Even if the letter is the Queen's," he snapped, "it proves nothing. Where is this rightful line? Some phantom among the rabble? Convenient. We shall not let a servant girl unmake the realm." Elise held his gaze. "I did not come to unmake. I came to make honest what you feign to worship." She turned the letter. A second page slid free, thin as breath, stuck by time to the first. On it, a name, a date, a midwife's mark, and a place. "Southfield," she said softly. A tremor passed through the Duke. Southfield, his poorest village. Elise felt the court tilt. They were not looking at the crown now. They were looking at her. Halvern pounced. How convenient that the farmer's whelp carries the key. Perhaps she forged it with mud on her hands and ambition in her eyes. She carried it because no one would suspect a girl serving wine, the Duke said, voice like winter steel. "Which I admit, includes me." "Then perhaps you'll enjoy the next part," Elise said, fighting the tremor in her chest. She read, "I charge the bearer to lay this truth before a heart that yet remembers the people. I name Ravenshire as witness and sword, if sword must be drawn." Eyes turned to the Duke, some with hope, more with calculation. Carden, returned from the capital and borrowed courage, stepped out from the crowd. "How touching," he said. "A letter with bedtime stories for peasants. Arrest her for sedition and burn the rags she calls proof." The Duke's blade left its scabbard with a whisper the chandeliers remembered. "Take one step toward her," he said, "and I will test how much of you is silk and how much is meat." Carden stopped. The guards did not move. They watched the man who paid them, and the man they feared. Elise placed the second page on the Duke's table. "There is more," she said. "The midwife's mark belongs to a woman named Mara, dead these 10 years, but her parish record remains. The baptism line was altered. The chaplain will know the ink, the steward of archives, if he still values his oath more than his purse." The old chaplain nodded once. "The winter of the Red Comet," he murmured. "I remember a funeral with no mother and a christening with too many candles." The court wavered, truth fighting the reflex of power. In that sway, the Duchess lunged for the parchment. Elise was faster. She gathered both pages and turned to the dais where the royal seal ring lay for ceremony. "Law or spectacle?" she asked the Duke. "Law," he said. Elise pressed the pages beneath the ring and struck it with the pommel of a guard's dagger. The wax kissed the paper with authority. She lifted the sheet stamped not only by a dead queen, but by the living court's own ritual. "Now it is entered," she said. "Try to erase it," Carden snarled. "Enough." He signaled to 2 household guards long bought by his coin. They surged. The Duke moved, and so did half the hall. Loyalty suddenly visible like veins under torn skin. Steel flashed. A goblet fell, spilling red like an omen. Elise stepped back, the letter clutched high to keep it clear of blades. A guard's sword swung toward her. The Duke intercepted, but another struck from the flank. Pain lanced Elise's arm. The parchment fluttered. She caught it with her wounded hand, streaking the edge with blood. "Stop!" she cried, voice ringing brighter than the chandeliers. "Strike me, and you stain the Queen's last word." It worked. Not because they had mercy, but because they adored image. The blades hesitated. In that breath, the Duke disarmed one attacker and drove Carden to his knees with the flat of his sword. "Confess," the Duke said. Carden laughed through broken breath. "Confess that your precious peasant waves a royal lie? That you want her enough to burn the world?" "No, my lord. I confess only this. The court will choose comfort over truth every time." "Perhaps," Elise said, holding up the blood-marked page, "until truth bleeds where all can see it." The chaplain raised his staff. "By the witness of this hall," he declared, voice suddenly immense, "let inquiry be opened under royal seal. Let the archives be brought. Let the midwives' book be read." His gaze found the watchers lining the balconies, the servants, musicians, grooms. "And let the people hear that the law remembers them today." The hall could not retreat to ignorance, not after the letter, not after blood on royal wax. The Duke lowered his blade. "Elise of Southfield," he said, giving her a name the court would be forced to learn, "will be placed under my protection until the inquiry concludes." "Protection?" Carden spat, still kneeling. "You mean possession?" "No," the Duke said. His eyes were on Elise, and for the first time there was nothing cold in them. "I mean oath." He turned to the assembly. "If there is treason here, it is not in a girl who kept a dead queen's trust. It is in men who traded truth for comfort." He set his sword point to the marble beside Carden's knee. "And comfort ends tonight." The orchestra, forgotten for an eternity, found silence again. The nobles did not cheer, they calculated. But in the galleries, among the ones who scrubbed their stains and filled their cups, a murmur rose like a tide. It sounded like hope learning how to speak. Elise pressed the sealed pages to her heart. Pain throbbed in her arm. Steadiness answered in her spine. Whatever the inquiry uncovered, one thing had already changed. A servant had spoken, and the world had listened. The crown would move slowly. Power always did. But truth, once named, has a way of arriving on time. The ballroom never regained its glitter that night. Nobles departed in silence, their jeweled masks unable to hide the fear in their eyes. The revelation of the Queen's letter had cracked the foundation of their world. For generations, they had ruled with arrogance, believing truth was theirs to shape. But now, truth had a voice, and it belonged to a peasant girl. Elise remained at the center of the hall, the parchment pressed to her heart, the blood on its edge sealing her oath. The Duke stood at her side, no longer her tormentor but her shield. He looked at her not as a servant, not even as an intruder into noble halls, but as the keeper of a flame brighter than crowns. "You understand what you've done," he said, his voice low but certain. "The court will never forgive. They will try to silence you." Elise met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "Let them try. I carried the Queen's truth through storms and shadows. I will carry it through fire if I must, but I will not kneel." For the first time, the Duke bowed, not in mockery but in recognition. "Then you will not face them alone. Ravenshire's sword will stand with you." The words hung in the air like an oath carved into stone. In that moment, the line between servant and noble, shadow and crown, shattered. A new alliance was born, not of power taken by force, but of truth carried by courage. As dawn broke, bells tolled across the kingdom, announcing the inquiry that could topple dynasties. To the nobles, it was the beginning of chaos. To the people in the villages who whispered Elise's name as though it were a prayer, it was the birth of hope. The inquiry called at dawn was swift and merciless. Archivists brought forth the Queen's diaries, the baptismal records, and the midwife's hidden notes. The truth unfolded before the entire realm. The child raised as heir had indeed been placed in the cradle by scheming hands. The rightful bloodline had been hidden in Southfield, far from the crown's reach. And then at last, the name was spoken aloud. "Elise of Southfield," the chaplain declared, holding the parchment high. "You are the Queen's true daughter." The hall erupted. Nobles cried treason, others cried miracle. Some fell to their knees in fear of rebellion, while others swore fealty on the spot. Elise, trembling, could scarcely breathe. She had carried the Queen's words, never dreaming they pointed to her own blood. The Duke's voice cut through the storm. The Queen's seal, the chaplain's oath, and the blood on her arm all bear witness. The crown belongs not to a lie, but to her. He dropped to one knee before her, head bowed. Slowly, others followed. One by one, lords and ladies bent in recognition of the truth they could no longer deny. Elise's heart thundered. She had lived her life as a peasant, mocked, silenced, forgotten. Now she stood not as a servant, but as heir. The bloodline of the Queen had endured in her veins all along. Tears blurred her vision as she spoke. "I never sought a crown. I sought only justice. If I am to wear it, let it not be for power, but for the people who raised me, who suffered as I did. The throne will no longer be a cage for lies, but a voice for those who had none." The chaplain anointed her brow with oil. The hall bowed. The Duke rose beside her, his voice steady. "By oath of Ravenshire, I pledge my sword to Queen Elise." The revelation of the Queen's letter shook the court like an earthquake, but crowns are not surrendered with a single tremor. In the days that followed, the castle became a battlefield without swords, though blades were never far. The nobles split into factions. Some whispered that Elise's blood was sacred. Others demanded her head for daring to read the Queen's words aloud. Gold changed hands in shadowed corridors, alliances cracked, and daggers gleamed under cloaks. Elise was kept under constant guard in Ravenshire's tower, not as a prisoner, but as a target shielded from unseen arrows. At night she heard the shouts of protest beyond the castle walls, villagers crying her name, soldiers swearing loyalty to their lords, priests calling for inquiry. Hope and fear walked side by side through the kingdom. The High Council convened. Scrolls of baptismal records, parish ledgers, and the Queen's private writings were examined. Archivists risked their lives to confirm the ink and wax were genuine. One steward, bribed to falsify testimony, was exposed when Elise remembered the prayer in the Queen's own tongue and recited it flawlessly. Murmurs spread. The blood in her veins was undeniable. Still, resistance burned. The Duchess shrieked treason at every gathering. Lord Halvern declared, "Better a false heir than a farmer's brat upon the throne." His words drew cheers from some, fear from others. The court was on the edge of civil war. And then, the Duke rose. In the council chamber, with nobles gathered in their finery and soldiers gripping their hilts, he drew his sword and laid it flat upon the marble. "I was the first to mock her," he declared. "I called her a rat in silks. And yet when danger came, she did not cower. She carried truth when all of us carried lies. If that blood is not royal, then what blood deserves the crown?" The chamber roared with outrage and applause in equal measure. Blades clashed. For hours, chaos reigned. But as dawn touched the stained glass, something shifted. The chaplain, oldest voice in the realm, stood trembling. He lifted the Queen's letter, the bloodstain of Elise still visible upon it. "I saw the Queen give birth," he said, "and I saw the night her infant was taken. I was sworn to silence by oath and by fear. Tonight I break both. The Queen's child lives in Elise of Southfield. I will stake my soul before God himself." His words cut deeper than any sword. Silence fell. Even the fiercest lords lowered their eyes. At last one baron knelt, then another. Not all, never all, but enough. Power bends not to truth alone, but to the tide of inevitability. And that tide now carried Elise. The coronation was not triumph, it was war in slow motion. Soldiers kept the peace as villagers flooded the capital. The nobles who resisted plotted still, but could not stop the tide. Elise was led to the throne, her plain hands trembling as the crown was lowered onto her brow. The moment the crown touched her head, the bells of the realm tolled, not by command, but because villagers across the land pulled the ropes themselves. Ravenshire's people wept and cheered. The farmer's daughter was their queen. And when she rose from the throne, she did not sit back as rulers had done for centuries. She stepped forward, into the light of the people, raising the blood-marked letter high. "My crown is not forged in gold," she said, her voice carrying through the square, "but in truth carried through suffering. If the nobles will not kneel to me, then let the people rise with me. I am Elise of Southfield, daughter of the queen, and I will reign not for palaces, but for the fields that fed me." The duke stood at her side, sword raised in oath. One by one, the soldiers struck their spears to the ground. The rebellion of truth became the coronation of a queen. And though enemies still lingered, plotting in the dark, the kingdom had witnessed what no blade could silence. The forgotten had risen, the crown reclaimed, and history rewritten by the voice of a servant girl. From that day, the chronicles recorded her name not as peasant nor servant, but as Elise the Just, the queen who refused to kneel. And so ends the tale of Elise of Southfield, the queen who refused to kneel. From the shadows of servitude to the weight of a crown, her courage carried truth through silence, danger, and betrayal. She proved that even in a world ruled by lies, justice can rise from the most forgotten places. Now I ask you, what would you have done in her place? Remained silent to survive, or revealed the truth no matter the cost? If stories of forbidden love, royal intrigue, and fearless women speak to your heart, subscribe to Royal Forbidden Tales. Here, every tale is born to challenge the powerful, to awaken reflection, and to keep you on the edge until the very last word. Because in this kingdom of stories, no one escapes the truth.